My name is Ali Reza Jafarzadeh, and I'm the Deputy Director of the NCRI's Washington office. Today, we have a distinguished panel discussing Ebrahim Raisi as he swears in to take over as the new president of the Iran regime and what the world, particularly the United States and Europe, should do in having an effective policy in dealing with Iran now that you have a mass murderer at the helm. Let me briefly introduce our distinguished panel members. Joining me on the panel is Judge Michael Mukasey, the 81st Attorney General of the United States. Thank you so much, Judge, for attending. Sure. We also have Senator Joe Lieberman, who represented Connecticut in the United States Senate spanning 3 decades. He was also Vice President nominee of the Democratic Party in the presidential elections in the year 2000. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ali Reza.
Sure. And joining us from London is Mr. Jeffrey Robertson, QC, a distinguished human rights barrister, academic, author, and broadcaster. He served as the first president and appeal judge in the UN War Crimes Court in Sierra Leone. He's done his own independent investigation of the 1988 massacre of thousands of political prisoners in Iran. Thank you so much, Mr. Robertson, for joining us all the way from London. But before we get to our panel, let me first introduce our new book that was released just this morning. The book title is actually Iran Call for Justice, and the case to hold Ebrahim Raisi to account for crimes against humanity.
Access to nuclear technology, and if there is no agreement in Vienna, as I wrote a book called Mullahs Without Mercy, which sets out.
Well, I take a somewhat less optimistic view of the possible effect, even of an agreement with the Iranians. The proof of that is that they continued to have an ICBM, a guided missile program. There is a ballistic missile program. There is no country in the world that has a ballistic missile program that does not also have a nuclear weapons program. None. Zero. And so there is eloquent proof that they intend, regardless of any agreement, to pursue a nuclear weapon. And that simply makes more acute the need to remove them from power and to call attention to their record and to weaken them internationally and within the country.
The rest of the world about how outrageous it is. Not just that Raisi has become, this mass murderer has become the president of Iran, but that the supreme leader and presumably the entire leadership group has chosen him to do that with all, as I said repeatedly, of the Iranian blood he has on his hands. So I think that the argument ahead is political in the best sense of that term. And basically for us to say to our administration here in Washington and for people throughout the world to say to their governments, how can we possibly continue to deal with a country led by a mass murderer?
With that, I want to give myself the liberty to really wrap up and end the discussion and draw some conclusions based on the discussion that all of the panel members have had. First of all, I think the most important thing was that you all mentioned that the culture of impunity for the mass murderers who rule Iran must end, and U.S. must take the lead in bringing to justice the leaders of the regime who have committed crimes against humanity and for 4 decades, particularly those responsible for the 1988 massacre, Khamenei, Raisi, and Ejei, the new Chief Justice, basically top the list of those who need to be brought to justice. Second, we really need to subject the Iranian regime to international sanctions under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. As we saw over the past year, the mullahs will never give up their nuclear weapons program, export of terrorism or aggression in the region. So that's what needs to be done. And most importantly, we really need to implement a zero tolerance policy, if you will, regarding the torture and execution of the Iranian people, the killing of the dissidents, the perpetrators really must be made to answer for their crimes, and you discuss a lot of the ways that could be done.